The sacred scripture speaks of a divine law, that the earth is not a permanent possession, but an inheritance granted to those who are righteous. And we have already written in the book of Psalms after the previous mention that the land of paradise is inherited by my righteous servants. Quran, Surah Al-Anbiya, 21:105. Have you ever wondered what it takes to turn a desperate gamble into a legendary victory? What happens when a leader removes every possible avenue of escape, forcing his people to choose between death and a victory that seems impossible? Could it be that true strength is only found when you sever your ties to the shore, leaving yourself with no one to rely on but God? This is the story of a man, a mountain, and the smoke from burning ships that heralded the dawn of a new civilization. The time was the dawn of the 8th century, the year 711. Across the narrow strait of water separating North Africa from Europe, the Iberian Peninsula languished under the iron fist of the Visigothic kingdom. It was a land of breathtaking beauty, of rolling green hills, winding rivers and rugged mountains, but its beauty was a veil for a deep sickness. The Visigothic rule had become decadent and tyrannical. King Roderick had usurped the throne, and the land was rife with bitter infighting among the nobility. The common people, especially the oppressed Jewish minority, suffered under heavy taxation and cruel laws. The land was a jewel, but its leadership was a corrupt and crumbling facade. On the southern shore, in the rugged lands of North Africa, a new power had risen. The Umayyad Caliphate, driven by the winds of faith, had brought a sense of order and justice. Its governor in the region was the brilliant strategist Musa ibn Nusayr, and under his command was a man destined for legend, Tariq ibn Ziyad. Tariq was a man of Berber origin, a recent convert to Islam whose piety was as renowned as his military genius. He was not a man of noble Arab lineage, but his character had earned him the trust of his superiors. He possessed a quiet, unshakable resolve, and a charisma that inspired fierce loyalty in his men. His eyes were fixed on the land across the water, a land groaning under the weight of its own injustice. Appeals for help from the oppressed people of Iberia, including the exiled family of the previous Visigothic king, reached North Africa. A small scouting mission confirmed the kingdom's weakness. The time was ripe. Musa ibn Nusayr, with the caliph's blessing, entrusted Tariq with a monumental task: to lead a small expeditionary force across the strait and establish a foothold. It was not intended as a full-scale invasion, but as a reconnaissance in force. Under the cover of night, a small fleet of ships began to ferry Tariq's army, a modest force of around 7,000 men, mostly Berbers like himself, across the treacherous waters. They landed on the shores of a land that would one day be known as Al-Andalus, near a colossal rock formation that would forever bear his name, Jabal al-Tariq, the Mountain of Tariq, a name the world now knows as Gibraltar. As the last of his men disembarked, their small ships bobbing in the bay behind them, they looked out at an unknown land, a powerful kingdom, and an uncertain future. Their only certainty was the faith in their hearts and the leader who stood before them. The first signs of their epic trial were about to appear on the horizon. The arrival of this small foreign army did not go unnoticed. The local Visigothic governor immediately sent word to King Roderick, who was campaigning in the north. The initial reports were likely dismissed with arrogance, a minor raid by some African tribesmen. But as Tariq's forces quickly secured the area around the rock, the alarm grew louder. King Roderick, enraged at this audacious challenge to his authority, abandoned his northern campaign and began to assemble a massive army, calling on every duke and count in his kingdom. For Tariq's small army, the first divine sign was the sheer scale of the enemy response. The force marching towards them was not a small detachment. It was the entire might of the Visigothic military machine. Scouts returned with terrifying news. King Roderick had amassed an army that dwarfed their own, a force estimated to be as large as 100,000 men, clad in heavy armor and confident in their overwhelming numbers. The hearts of some of Tariq's men began to tremble. They were in a foreign land with a vast hostile army marching towards them, and the deep blue sea at their backs. The instinct for survival screamed at them. Return to the ships. Go back to the safety of North Africa. They had accomplished their mission of establishing a foothold. Now was the time to retreat. This was the moment of weakness, the whisper of doubt that could unravel the entire enterprise. It was a test that every believer must face, a moment where trust in material means collides with trust in God. A test described in the Quran itself. Those to whom hypocrites said, fearfully, "Indeed, the people have gathered against you, so fear them." But it only increased them in faith. And they said, resolutely, "Sufficient for us is Allah, and He is the best disposer of affairs." Quran, Surah Al-Imran 3:173.
Tariq ibn Ziyad knew this was the decisive moment. He saw the fear in the eyes of his soldiers. He knew that the sight of their ships in the harbor was not a comfort, but a temptation, a psychological back door that would prevent them from committing their entire souls to the battle ahead. He needed to forge them into a single, unbreakable weapon. And so, he made a decision so radical, so utterly insane by any conventional military standard, that it has echoed through history for 13 centuries. He gathered his men on the shoreline, the great Rock of Gibraltar looming over them. They looked out at the bay, at the very ships that had carried them to safety. And then Tariq gave the order. "Burn the ships!" The soldiers stared in disbelief. It was a command that defied all logic, but they trusted their commander. Torches were lit, the flames licked at the dry timber of the fleet. Thick plumes of black smoke choked the sky, a horrifying, magnificent spectacle of destruction. The crackling of the burning wood was the sound of their only escape route being turned to ash. They were now stranded, an island of 7,000 men, caught between a vengeful ocean and a vengeful army 100,000 strong. There was no retreat. There was no surrender. There was only the land in front of them, or the sea at their backs. The final, unmistakable sign had been given, not by the enemy, but by their own leader. With the smoke from their burning ships still stinging their eyes, Tariq ibn Ziyad gathered his small, stranded army. The final call had been made. There was no path behind them, only the path forward. He now had to transform their despair into a righteous fury, their terror into an unshakable faith. He drew his sword, stood before his men, and delivered one of the most legendary speeches in military history, a speech preserved in the chronicles of Al-Makari. "Oh, my warriors, whither would you flee? Behind you is the sea, before you, the enemy. You have now no other hope than your own courage and your own constancy. Remember that in this country you are more unfortunate than the orphan seated at the table of the avaricious master. Your enemy is before you, protected by an innumerable army. He has men in abundance, but you, as your only aid, have your own swords. You know that the commander of the true believers, Al-Walid, has chosen you from among all his warriors. You have bought your lives with the price of paradise. Do not disgrace your name, and be not cowards." His words were fire. He had reminded them of their faith, their purpose, and the divine promise that awaited them. This was no longer a battle for land or for glory. It was a battle for eternity. The small army, their hearts now ablaze with a combination of desperation and divine hope, marched forward to meet their fate at the banks of the Guadalete River. The Battle of Guadalete was a scene from an epic. For days, the two armies clashed, the smaller Muslim force, fighting with the ferocity of men with nothing to lose, held their ground against the massive Visigothic waves. The Visigoths, confident in their numbers, were stunned by the fanatical courage of their opponents. On the final day, Tariq himself led a charge directly at the heart of the enemy lines, seeking out King Roderick, who sat upon a jewel-encrusted throne carried by mules. The final charge broke the Visigothic line. In the ensuing chaos, King Roderick was killed, his magnificent throne abandoned. The head of the snake had been cut off, the vast army deprived of its king, and shocked by the defeat of its elite guard, dissolved into a panicked, headlong rout. The punishment for their tyranny and arrogance had been delivered at the hands of 7,000 stranded men. A handful of believers, by standing firm, had inherited the land. The aftermath was a scene of stunned disbelief. The jewel-encrusted boots and royal robes of King Roderick were found on the riverbank, but his body was gone, swept away by the current. The Visigothic kingdom, which had stood for centuries, had been shattered in a single decisive battle. The story of the burning ships, once a symbol of insane desperation, was now a legend of unwavering faith. The Quran describes such moments when a small, faithful band overcomes a vast, arrogant one. How many a small company has overcome a large company by permission of Allah, and Allah is with the patient. Quran, Surah Al-Baqarah 2:249. The victory at Guadalete was not the end, it was the beginning. The path was now open, and what followed was the swift and almost total conquest of the Iberian Peninsula, an event that would change the course of European history forever. A kingdom forgotten by justice had been ended, and a new chapter, written by the hand of faith, had begun. Why does this story, whether a literal event or a powerful legend, resonate so deeply? Because it is a profound spiritual metaphor for the human condition. Every day we stand on the shores of our own lives with the ships of our attachments bobbing in the harbor behind us. Our wealth, our status, our ego, our safety nets, our backup plans. We want to move forward in our faith, to conquer the enemy of our own lower selves, but we are too afraid to burn the ships. We keep one foot on the shore and one foot in the boat, ready to retreat at the first sign of difficulty. Tariq's act was a physical manifestation of a spiritual principle. Tawakkul, perfect and absolute reliance on God. It is the understanding that true power does not come from our resources, our connections, or our escape routes. It comes from severing our reliance on all of those things and placing our trust completely and utterly in Allah. This principle is not just for warriors on a battlefield. It is for every soul striving to overcome an obstacle. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, perfectly described this state of heart. If you were to rely upon Allah with the reliance He is due, you would be given provision like the bird is given provision. It goes out in the morning hungry and returns in the evening full. Jami at-Tirmidhi 23:44. The bird has no savings account, no stored provisions. It flies out into the empty sky with nothing but its trust in its creator. Tariq forced his army to become like that bird. By burning the ships, he removed the illusion of self-sufficiency.
and created a vacuum that could only be filled by faith. His story is a challenge to us all. What are the ships in your life that you refuse to burn? What safety net are you clinging to that is preventing you from truly relying on God and unlocking your full potential? The burning ships were an act of apparent madness, but they were also an act of profound faith. The victory that followed was not just a military miracle, it was a divine response to that faith. The conquest of Al-Andalus, which began with smoke and desperation, blossomed into one of the most brilliant civilizations in human history, a beacon of learning, art, and science for centuries. It is a testament to the mercy that can emerge from a moment of trial. When the believers were cornered, with no hope in sight, they turned to God with their whole beings, and He did not just give them victory, He gave them an entire civilization. The Quran promises this exchange to those who are sincere.
Indeed, Allah has purchased from the believers their lives and their properties in exchange for that they will have paradise. Quran, Surah At-Tawbah 9:111. The soldiers on that shore traded their ships for a kingdom. They traded their lives for paradise. Tariq's legacy is not just a mountain named after him. It is the enduring lesson that when we are brave enough to burn our worldly ships of escape and security, we open the door for God to grant us a victory far greater than we could ever have imagined. It forces us to ask ourselves, are we living a life of calculated safety? Or are we ready to embrace the terrifying, liberating freedom of having no way back, with our eyes fixed only on the promise of God?